Okay, so we're diving into some really fascinating stuff today about how to make the most of our reading.
Yeah, it's about going beyond just, you know, decoding the words on the page and really getting to that deeper level of understanding and engagement.
Right, like how do we make reading something that we not only do, but something we actually get and can use?
And I mean, you guys have sent in some seriously thought-provoking sources on this topic, so
We've got a lot to unpack here.
definitely. We're going to try to cut through some of the complexities of the educational psychology research and pull out the stuff that can actually make a difference for you.
Yeah, because there's a lot of it out there.
There is.
And I think one of the things that kept popping up in the stuff you sent was this whole idea of visualization.
Absolutely.
It's like, how do we create that mental movie in our heads as we read?
Exactly. It's not just about seeing words, right? It's about building what researchers call a situation model, which is basically a mental representation of what's going on in the text.
It's like bringing the words to life in your mind.
Exactly. And that's where visualization comes in. It's about creating those non-linguistic representations, those sensory experiences that really help us connect with the material.
So our mission today is to really dig into these different visualization strategies that your sources talk about.
Yep. We want to understand how you can use these techniques to build that mental movie and ultimately understand what you read on a much deeper level.
And I think the paper becoming part of the story, refueling the interest in visualization strategies for reading comprehension, is going to be our main guide for this deep dive.
It's a great one.
And, you know, it's so important to be talking about this because reading comprehension is a huge deal.
It is. I mean, it's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah.
We have the stats to prove it.
Right. Like the U.S. Nation's report card shows us that a pretty significant chunk of 4th and 8th graders have trouble with reading comprehension.
Yeah, it's not just a U.S. thing either. You see similar patterns in other countries like the Netherlands.
Wow. Okay, so this
Uh,
is widespread.
It is. And this isn't just about struggling in school either. It impacts your job prospects, how you navigate society, pretty much everything.
It has a ripple effect on your whole life.
It does. The RAND reading study actually highlighted this, how reading comprehension difficulties can have such broad and long-lasting consequences.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is.
And okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. You know, we talk about creating mental pictures in our heads when we read.
Right.
It seems like such an intuitive thing to do, like it should be a natural part of
You
understanding.
think so, right.
But it often doesn't get much attention in how we're taught to read.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising, isn't it?
It is. And there's research, even recent studies in the Netherlands, that suggest that these visualization strategies are surprisingly underused in classrooms.
Which makes you wonder why, right?
Why?
Why is something so potentially helpful, not a bigger focus?
Exactly. So let's get into the why of visualization. Why is it so powerful for understanding what we read? I think we have to start with the theories behind it.
Absolutely. And one of the big ones is Pavio's dual coding theory, or DCT for short.
PTT, okay?
Think of it this way. You have two separate but interconnected systems in your brain for processing information. One for words, the verbal system, and one for images and other nonverbal stuff, the nonverbal system.
Okay, so two tracks running in parallel.
Exactly. And DCT says that these two tracks work together, they complement each other, to give you a richer understanding of what you're reading or learning.
So if I say the word hamburger,
Okay, hamburger. I'm listening.
your verbal system processes the word itself, you recognize it, and you understand the concept of a hamburger.
Right.
But then your nonverbal system might kick in and actually conjure up a visual image of a juicy hamburger.
Oh man, now I'm getting hungry.
Right. You might picture a specific hamburger, like one you had recently, or maybe just a generic hamburger image.
And maybe even smell the grilled patty and the melted cheese.
Exactly. That's the nonverbal system at work.
It's all about those sensory details, the sights, smells, maybe even the feeling of biting into that hamburger.
And according to DCT, it's the combination of these two, the verbal and the nonverbal, that gives you a fuller, more complete understanding of what hamburger really means.
It's like you're experiencing the concept on multiple levels.
Okay, so this idea of separate systems for verbal and nonverbal information, it reminds me a bit of Baddeley's working memory model.
To test some similarities, yeah.
Like he talks about the phonological loop, which is for processing verbal information, and the visuospatial sketchpad, which handles visual and spatial information.
Right, but there's a key difference between the two models. DCT suggests that these verbal and nonverbal systems actually interact directly with each other.
So they're more tightly coupled.
Yeah, whereas in Baddeley's model, The integration of information from these different systems is managed by a central executive part of the brain.
So in Badley's model, there's a kind of manager that oversees the whole process.
Exactly.
But both models highlight that we process information in different ways and that those different modes of processing can work together to enhance our understanding.
Absolutely. Now, going back to DCT, there's another really important point to make here. It's not just about seeing a picture in your head.
Right, so there's more to it.
There is. A fundamental idea in DCT is that our mental images actually retain some of the sensory experiences from which they originated.
So they're not just flat visual representations.
Now, they're much richer than that.
Okay.
So your image of that hamburger might not only include the visual of it, but also the sound of the sizzle on the grill, the feel of the bun in your hand, and even the taste of it in your mouth.
It's almost like our brains can recreate those sensory experiences even when we're just reading or thinking about them.
Precisely. We have a mind's ear, a mind's nose, a mind's tongue, you could say.
It's amazing how our brains can do that.
It is. And this is something that researchers like Sadowski and Paivio really emphasized. Mental imagery isn't just visual. It can involve all of our senses.
Okay, so it's multisensory.
Absolutely. Algazine and Duville even talked about this idea of a multisensory blackboard in our minds, where we can sort of play around with verbal and spatial information using all of our senses.
I love that analogy, the multisensory blackboard.
It's a great way to think about it, right?
Yeah, it is.
And when you're reading, creating these multisensory mental representations can be so powerful because it helps you activate other memories and make the story or the information feel much more personal to you.
It's like you're drawing on your own experiences to understand what you're reading.
Exactly. And this is where that connection to prior knowledge comes in, as Sadowski and Paivio pointed out. By tapping into what you already know, you can integrate new information more effectively and make it more meaningful.
Okay, so we've got DCT, which emphasizes the interplay of verbal and nonverbal systems in our brains. And now there's another really interesting perspective, theories of embodied cognition.
Yes, this is where things get even more fascinating.
Can you tell us how embodied cognition is different from DCT?
Sure. While both DCT and embodied cognition recognize the importance of our senses in how we understand the world, embodied cognition goes a step further.
Okay, so how so?
It suggests that our actual physical bodies, our senses, how we move, our physical interactions with the environment actually shape how we think.
So it's not just that our bodies influence our thoughts, but that our very understanding is rooted in our physical experiences.
Exactly. And unlike DCT, which emphasizes the interaction between verbal and nonverbal systems, embodied cognition doesn't necessarily require a separate verbal code.
Interesting.
It focuses more on how our nonverbal mental representations are grounded in our physical experiences.
So it's less about translating words into pictures and more about how our understanding is built upon a foundation of sensory and motor experiences.
That's a great way to put it.
Can you give us an example of how this embodied cognition thing might work when you're reading?
Absolutely. Let's say you're reading a sentence like, "You catch a ball."
Okay, simple enough.
Right. Now, according to embodied cognition, your brain doesn't just process those words abstractly. It actually reactivates the feeling of catching a ball, the way your hands move to grasp it, the feeling of the impact in your palm, the visual of the ball coming towards you.
So it's like you're reliving the experience in your mind.
Exactly. It's called mental simulation. You're basically simulating the action in your brain, drawing on your past experiences of catching a ball.
And this mental simulation, it can happen without us even consciously trying to picture it, right?
Exactly. As Postma and Barcelou explain, it can be an unconscious process. It's like your brain has this vast library of past experiences, and when you read about something, it automatically pulls up similar experiences to help you understand.
It's like a mental shortcut using our body's memory.
It is.
Now, is there any actual proof that this mental simulation thing happens, or is it just a theory?
Oh, there's definitely evidence for it. One really cool example is a study where people read the sentence, "He saw the eagle in the nest."
Okay, so we're picturing an eagle in a nest.
Right. And the researchers found that people who read that sentence were more likely to subconsciously picture the eagle with its wings folded in, as it would be in a nest, rather than with its wings spread out.
Interesting.
And they would even react faster to a picture of an eagle with folded wings compared to one with its wings spread out.
It's like their mental image was already anticipating the context of the nest.
Exactly. It's a subtle effect, but it shows that our mental representations are influenced by what we read, and that our brains are constantly trying to create a coherent and realistic simulation of what's happening.
It's amazing how much is going on beneath the surface when we're reading.
It is. And then there's something called the action-sentence compatibility effect, which is another piece of evidence for embodied cognition.
Okay, what is that?
So let's say you read the sentence, John closed the drawer.
All right.
Studies have shown that after reading that sentence, people might take a tiny bit longer to make a movement that involves pushing their hand away from their body, like they're pushing something away.
Because the sentence implied a pulling motion, like pulling the drawer closed.
Exactly. It's like their motor system is primed for a pulling action, so it takes a moment to adjust to a different kind of movement.
It's almost like our brains are preparing to act out what we're reading.
In a way they are, and these little behavioral quirks, they provide really compelling evidence that our motor system, how our bodies move, is actively involved in how we understand language.
Our bodies are much more involved in reading than we probably ever realized.
Absolutely. And brain imaging studies actually support this too. They've shown that some of the same areas of the brain that light up when we're actually performing an action like grasping an object also light up when we read or hear words related to that action.
Wow, so there's a real overlap in how our brains process language and real-world actions.
There is. And if we zoom out and think about the bigger picture, this suggests that actually physically doing something related to what you're reading could be a really powerful way to help things sink in.
Like if you're reading about building a birdhouse, actually going through the motions of hammering and sawing could help you understand the process better.
Exactly. And we'll talk more about this later when we get to Glenberg's moved by reading intervention,
Yeah.
which actually involves physical manipulation of objects as a reading comprehension strategy.
I'm intrigued.
It's really cool stuff.
Okay, so we've got DCT, embodied cognition, all these fascinating theories about how our brains make meaning of what we read.
And how our bodies are involved too.
Right. Now, I want to talk about how we can actually use this knowledge to become better readers. Your paper talks about different ways to categorize visualization strategies.
Yes, it's helpful to have a framework for thinking about all the different approaches.
So can you walk us through that?
Of course. We can think about visualization strategies along two main dimensions. First, whether they're internal, happening in your mind, or external, involving something in your environment.
Okay, so internal versus external.
Right. And second, whether they're unimodal, focusing on a single sense, usually vision, or multimodal, engaging multiple senses.
Unimodal versus multimodal. Okay, got it.
So you can have internal visual imagery, which is just picturing things in your head.
Like that mental movie we were talking about.
Exactly. Then you have internal multimodal imagery, which is like internal visual imagery, but with the added dimension of engaging other senses like hearing, touch, smell, and even taste.
So it's like creating a fully immersive experience in your mind.
Exactly. Then on the external side, you have external visual representations, which could be things like diagrams, drawings, or even mind maps that you create to represent the information you're reading.
So it's taking the information out of your head and putting it into a visual form that you can see and interact with.
Exactly. And finally, you have external multimodal activities, which could involve things like acting out a scene, using manipulatives to represent concepts, or even building a model.
So it's about engaging your whole body and multiple senses to understand the material. This framework is really helpful. It gives us a clear way to think about all the different approaches to visualization.
It does. And it's important to keep in mind that both internal and external visualization strategies, regardless of whether they're unimodal or multimodal, are all ultimately aimed at helping you build that situation model.
That mental representation of what's happening in the text.
Exactly. And this situation model is what allows you to go beyond just decoding the words and really understand the relationships between concepts, make inferences, and draw conclusions.
It's like building a deeper level of meaning.
Precisely. Now, you mentioned external visualization and making a distinction between things you create yourself and things that are already there, like pictures in a book.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Like, are those pre-made visuals considered external visualizations?
Well, while illustrations and other visuals provided in a text can certainly help with comprehension, when we talk about external visualization strategies here, we're mainly focusing on things that the reader actively creates themselves.
Okay, so it's about the process of creating the visual representation, not just looking at one that's already there.
Exactly. It's that active engagement that seems to be key.
Okay, that makes sense.
So with that in mind, let's start by exploring internal and unimodal visualization, which is what most people probably think of as just making a picture in your head.
This is probably the most common approach, right?
It is, and it's where a lot of the early research on visualization and reading comprehension focused. The idea was that if you could create a vivid mental image of what you were reading, it would help you organize the information and remember it better, which would then lead to better understanding.
Seems logical enough.
It does,
Yeah.
but the results of those early studies back in the 70s and 80s were a bit all over the place.
Really? So sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't.
Yeah, some studies showed a link between mental imagery and comprehension, but others didn't find much of a connection. And one of the key insights to emerge from that research is that simply telling people to make a picture in your head often isn't enough to see any real benefits.
Why do you think that is?
Well, a few things probably contributed to those mixed results. One factor is the age of the people in the studies. Younger children might not have the same ability to create and manipulate mental images as older children and adults.
That makes sense. Like their brains might not be quite developed enough for that yet.
Exactly. And the type of text they were reading also played a role. It's probably easier to create mental images for a narrative text, like a story, than for a more expository text, like a science textbook.
Yeah, because stories tend to be more descriptive and have more vivid language.
Right. And even how they were tested on their comprehension made a difference. Were they just asked to recall facts, or did they have to answer questions that required them to make inferences or draw conclusions?
So it's not just about remembering what you read, but about understanding it on a deeper level.
Exactly. But probably the most important factor was how much instruction they received on how to visualize.
So it's not just about telling someone to make a picture in their head, it's about teaching them the skills and strategies for doing it effectively.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those early studies just gave that simple instruction, make a picture in your head, without any further guidance.
And that wasn't enough.
Not really. They often didn't see much improvement in reading comprehension. There was a study, for example, where high school students were just told to try to create vivid mental images while reading a factual passage, and they didn't understand it any better than students who were just told to read carefully.
So just telling them to visualize didn't give them any advantage.
Nope. And we see similar results across different ages, and even with students who struggle with reading. It's like that instruction alone doesn't do much.
It's surprising because it seems like visualizing should just naturally help you understand better.
It does, right.
Yeah.
But it turns out it's not as simple as that. Now, there were some studies, mostly with younger elementary school students reading stories, where that simple make-a-picture instruction did seem to help.
Interesting. So maybe it works better for younger kids and for certain types of texts.
That's what the research suggests. And this finding actually fits with what we know about how children's ability to use mental imagery develops over time. As kids get older, they generally get better at using mental images when they read, so the younger ones might need a little more explicit instruction to get them started.
It's like they need a little nudge in the right direction.
Exactly. There was a study that found that third graders benefited more from being told to visualize than first graders did, which suggests that there's a developmental aspect to this.
Like the younger kids might not have the same level of mental imagery skills yet.
Right. And another study found that fourth graders improved with this instruction, but sixth graders didn't, which could mean that by that age, kids have already developed their own reading strategies, including their own way of visualizing if they need to.
So maybe older kids are already doing it on their own without needing to be told.
It's possible. And here's another interesting finding. There's some evidence that that basic instruction, make a picture in your head, might be most helpful for students who are identified as struggling readers.
Really? That's counterintuitive.
I know, right? You'd think they would need more than just that simple instruction. But it could be that for those students, they have the capacity for mental imagery, but they're just not using it spontaneously when they read.
So maybe it's a matter of bringing that skill to the forefront of their awareness.
Exactly. So it seems like just telling someone to visualize might only help if they already have some natural ability to do it, but just aren't thinking to apply it when they read. But it doesn't actually teach them how to visualize effectively.
Right, like what to focus on, how to create a detailed image, how to use their other senses.
Precisely. And there's also the risk that they might create mental images that aren't really relevant to what they're reading,
Yeah.
which could actually make understanding harder.
Like they go off on a mental tangent.
Exactly. Plus, this simple instruction often leads to people just creating a single static image in their minds. But reading comprehension is more dynamic than that. It's about building an ongoing understanding as you read, constantly updating your mental model.
It's like building a puzzle piece by piece.
Yes. And some researchers have even pointed out that just telling kids to make a picture in their head might lead them to imagine something like a television in their heads, which doesn't really give them any concrete steps or strategies for how to actually do it.
It's too vague.
It is.
Yeah.
So the takeaway here is that simply telling someone to visualize isn't the magic fix for reading comprehension. It might be a starting point, but it's not enough on its own.
Okay, so what about actually teaching people how to create mental pictures?
Now, that's where the research gets much more promising. Studies that involve more specific training in how to visualize generally show more positive results across different grade levels and even for students who struggle with reading.
So it's about giving them the tools and strategies they need.
Exactly. When people are explicitly taught how to make mental images while reading, they tend to remember more, make better inferences, and even become more aware of when they're not understanding something, which is crucial for good reading comprehension.
So they're better at monitoring their own understanding.
Yes. And there are a lot of different ways to teach visualization skills. Some programs use modeling, where the teacher shows the students how to create mental images based on the text.
So it's like, watch me do it, now you try.
Exactly. And other programs use prompts, asking students specific questions to guide them in creating their images.
Like, what do you see? What colors are there? What sounds do you hear?
Exactly. And these more explicit training methods tend to be more effective than just telling someone to visualize.
Can you give us an example of what this kind of training might look like in action?
Sure. There was a study by Gambrell and Bales where they worked with 4th and 5th graders, and they gave them a short 30-minute training session on how to create visual images while reading.
That's not a lot of time.
It wasn't, but even that short amount of training made a difference. The researchers modeled how to create visual images based on the text, and they encouraged the students to do the same, prompting them to think about specific details of their images.
So they were really guiding them through the process.
They were. And what they found was that the students who received this training were better at knowing when they weren't understanding something compared to a group that was just told to try to understand and remember the story.
So they were better at monitoring their own comprehension.
Exactly.
Ah.
And that's a really important skill for becoming a better reader.
It is.
And another group of researchers, Clark and colleagues, used a different strategy with special education students.
So students who really struggle with reading.
Right. And their strategy involved a multi-step process where the students would first read a section of text, then try to imagine a scene based on what they read, then describe that image out loud, then evaluate whether their image made sense based on the text, and then repeat the process as they read further.
So it was very interactive and involved multiple steps.
It was. And that emphasis on describing the image out loud and evaluating whether it fits with the text is really important because it helps the students to be more aware of what they're understanding and to correct any misconceptions.
It forces them to really think about what they're visualizing.
Exactly. And then there was another study by Johnson-Glenberg that involved a much longer 10-week training program.
Okay, so much more intensive.
Yes, it was. And in this study, they compared teaching kids to create and describe mental pictures with teaching them more verbal strategies, like summarizing or paraphrasing what they read.
So they were comparing different approaches to reading comprehension.
Right. And what they found was that both groups, the visualization group and the verbal strategy group, improved their comprehension significantly compared to a control group that didn't receive any specific instruction.
Interesting. So both approaches were effective, but did one stand out as being better?
That's a good question. In this particular study, the two approaches didn't show a significant difference in terms of their effectiveness. They both helped the students to understand better, but one wasn't clearly better than the other.
So it might depend on the individual learner which approach works best for them.
It's very possible. Now, one important thing to note is that when this kind of imagery training is compared to other effective reading comprehension strategies, like the summarizing and text structuring strategies we just mentioned, imagery training doesn't always come out as significantly better.
So it's a helpful tool, but maybe not the only tool you need in your reading comprehension toolbox.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for you.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about using actual pictures or illustrations during this imagery training? Does that help?
It seems like it can. A number of studies have shown that providing students with visual aids, like pictures or illustrations, can actually enhance the effectiveness of imagery training, especially for younger children and for those who struggle with reading.
So it's like giving them a visual starting point.
Exactly. One classic study by Presley showed young children pictures that went along with sentences, and they encouraged them to create mental images that were similar to those pictures. And this method, and similar ones, have been successful in other studies, particularly for students who have difficulty with reading comprehension.
So it's almost like the illustrations act as a kind of training wheel, helping them to get a sense of what a good mental image looks like.
That's a great analogy. And there's a study by Oak Hill and Patel where they showed children pictures of events from a story, and then they guided the kids in forming their own mental images based on those pictures, and they found that this was really helpful, especially for the students who were struggling.
So it provides a scaffold for their mental imagery.
It does. And another study by Gambrell and Jaywitz found that when kids both looked at illustrations and tried to form their own mental images, it was particularly effective.
So the combination of the two seems to be key.
It does. And this actually fits with what we know about multimedia learning, which is this idea that when you process information, both visually and vocally, it can actually reduce the load on your working memory, which is that part of your brain responsible for holding information temporarily.
So it's like giving your brain two different pathways to process the information, which makes it easier to understand.
Exactly. Goes back to that dual coding idea, right? Two systems working together.
Yeah. And it also connects to Badley's working memory model, where having both the visual and verbal channels engaged can help to distribute the cognitive load.
Precisely. And some researchers have even suggested using short movie clips or having teachers draw simple sketches on the board to show kids what mental imaging could look like.
So making it more concrete and tangible.
Yes, giving them a clear example to follow.
I like those ideas. Have they been tested out in any studies?
Not yet, but they're definitely interesting possibilities.
So the bottom line here is that while simply telling someone to visualize might not be enough, explicitly teaching them how to create mental images, especially when combined with visual aids, can be a really powerful way to boost reading comprehension.
Absolutely. It's about providing the right kind of instruction and support.
Okay, so we've covered internal and unimodal visualization. Now let's move on to the next level. Internal and multimodal visualization.
Yes. This is where we start to really tap into the richness of our sensory experiences.
And this makes a lot of sense, especially after our earlier discussion about dual coding theory and embodied cognition. We know that our mental models of the world are likely multisensory, involving all of our senses, not just vision.
Exactly. But as you mentioned earlier, most of the research on visualization has really just focused on what we see in our minds, that internal visual imagery.
Right, so the multisensory aspect has been relatively unexplored.
It has. But there's some really interesting studies starting to emerge that are looking at what happens when we engage more of our senses while reading.
Tell us about those. What are some ways that people are trying to bring in multiple senses when they read?
One really interesting approach is called the sensory activation model, or SAM for short.
Yeah, okay.
It was developed by a researcher named Duville, and it's a strategy where readers are explicitly encouraged to think about how what they're reading might look, sound, taste, smell, and feel.
So they're actively engaging all of their senses.
They are. They might work with texts that have a lot of sensory language, and they practice actively conjuring up those sensory experiences in their minds as they read.
So if they read about a character walking through a forest, they might try to imagine what the trees look like, what the leaves sound like rustling in the wind, what the forest floor smells like.
Exactly. And what they've found is that students who are trained in this SAM approach tend to create more mental images overall. And they also use a wider range of sensory words in their own writing.
So it's like they're expanding their sensory vocabulary and their ability to create rich mental representations.
They are. They even reported that it made reading feel more like going to a movie in my head, which sounds pretty engaging.
It does. That's a great way to put it. And they found similar effects with younger second grade students as well.
They did. So it seems like this approach can be effective across different age groups.
That's really encouraging. But did they actually measure whether this SAM approach led to better comprehension, like objectively?
That's a really important question. And honestly, that's one of the limitations of the research on SAM so far. While it seems to be really good at getting people to create more vivid and multisensory mental images, the studies haven't directly measured whether it leads to improvements in reading comprehension scores or on other measures of understanding.
So while it seems promising for making reading more engaging and immersive, we still need more evidence to say for sure whether it directly improves comprehension.
Exactly. It's an area that definitely needs more research.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, You mentioned another area of research looking at internal multimodal visualization that involves movement. This is Glenberg's moved by reading intervention, right?
Yes, this is one of my favorites, and it connects back to that embodied cognition idea we were talking about earlier.
Can you refresh our memory on what that was?
Sure. So the Move by Reading program has two main phases. In the first phase, called physical manipulation, kids actually use physical toys or objects to act out what's happening in short stories.
So they're physically embodying the actions of the story.
Exactly. And then in the second phase, called Imagine Manipulation, the toys are taken away, and the kids are instructed to imagine moving those same toys in their minds as they read new similar stories.
So they're still engaging their motor system, but they're doing it internally in their imagination.
Exactly. And the idea is that by engaging both their visual and motor systems in this way, they'll create a more robust and memorable mental representation of the story.
And what has they found? Does this imagine manipulation strategy actually work?
The studies so far suggest that it does, at least for older elementary school students. They found that third graders who used this strategy were able to recall more details from the story and make better inferences compared to kids who just reread the text silently.
So it seems to give them a real advantage in terms of understanding and remembering the story.
It does. However, they haven't seen the same consistent benefits for younger kids, like first and second graders, which again could be related to that developmental trajectory of mental imagery skills.
Right, so it seems like the ability to effectively imagine manipulating objects while reading might improve as kids get older.
That's what the research suggests. And Glenberg, the researcher who developed this intervention, argues that for the older kids, it's like they're encoding the information in both visual and motor formats, which gives them more ways to access and retrieve it later.
It's like creating multiple pathways to the information in their brains.
Exactly. And he also points out that the instructions for imagined manipulation are very clear and